السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على رحمة للعالمين محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين، وبعد. فقد قال الله تعالى في القرآن المجيد: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم: والفجر وليال عشر والشفع والوتر والليل إذا يسر هل في ذلك قسم لذي حجر ألم تر كيف فعل ربك بعاد إرم ذات العماد التي لم يخلق مثلها في البلاد وثمود الذين جابوا الصخر بالواد وفرعون ذي الأوتاد الذين طغوا في البلاد فأكثروا فيها الفساد فصب عليهم ربك صوت عذاب إن ربك لبالمرصاد فأما الإنسان إذا ما ابتلاه ربه فأكرمه ونعمه فيقول ربي أكرمن وأما إذا ما ابتلاه فقدر عليه رزقه فيقول ربي أهانن كلا بل لا تكرمون اليتيم ولا تحاضون على طعام المسكين وتأكلون التراث أكلا لما وتحبون المال حبا جما كلا إذا دكت الأرض دكا دكا وجاء ربك والملك صفا صفا وجيء يومئذ بجهنم يومئذ يتذكر الإنسان وأنى له الذكرى يقول يا ليتني قدمت لحياتي فيومئذ لا يعذب عذابه أحد ولا يوثق وثاقه أحد يا أيتها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية فادخلي في عبادي وادخلي جنتي. صدق الله العظيم. وقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم: المهاجر من هاجر نهى الله عنه. وقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم: أعدى عدوك نفسك التي بين جنبيك، أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. Bismillah Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. As we continue our series with the Tafsir, today we are continuing with Surah al-Fajr, which is referring to the dawn, or the morning break, the daybreak. And we had concluded last week with Surah Ghashiyah, which was referring to the overwhelming event of Yawm al-Qiyamah. And so what we'll see in this surah, such a very great connection with the previous surah, is about the Day of Judgment itself. And what kind of scenes are we going to see on that day? What are the sayings of some of the people, the disbelievers, as well as the believers? Because we want to realize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Qur'an is His kalam, the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And nowhere in history do we see anyone else talking about the Day of Judgment in their books, like the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is discussing. It's kind of something very unique in the sense that it's out of the box, it's out of the ordinary of what we would have in our writing style and the stories that we would normally portray. But here in the Qur'an, one of the greatest things that no other book can rival with the Qur'an is its detail and its clarity in regards to the Day of Judgment and Qiyamah and the scenes of Qiyamah. So as we begin Surah Fajr, we must know that it's a Makkan surah. And in the Qur'an, it's surah number 89. And it consists of 30 ayat. And as we begin our normal routine, as the scholars of Tafsir usually start their Tafsir, they see what the connection of this current surah is with the previous surah. So number one, the previous surah ended with Inna ilayna iyabahum, referring to indeed to us will be their return. Talking about all of us. Our return will be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but specifically those who disobeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and turned away from His commandments, as we have seen. But in this surah, what do we see? أَلَمْ تَرَ كَيْفَ فَعَلَ رَبُّكَ بِعَادٍ إِرَمَ ذَاتِ الْعِمَادِ. Have you not seen how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your Lord, has dealt with Ad, the nation of Ad, and Iram, those who were very strong in terms of their structure and buildings? Don't you realize and look at their ending? That's number one. And so in that context, we have to understand that there was a downfall of these nations that rose to power. But the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, if those people, that nation doesn't recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they attribute to themselves that strength, as we are going to see in this surah, that they had love for mal, hubban jamma, and they had such a great and intense love for mal and wealth, as we are going to talk about inshallah in this surah. But in turn, what were they supposed to have? They were supposed to have the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Oh my brothers and sisters, be very clear that the Qur'an is a book for guidance for all of mankind. And if we don't take heed, then the same ending that occurred to these nations will occur to you. And so this is something we must realize from this surah that we're going to see, Surah Al-Fajr. Number two, in the previous surah I mentioned, وُجُوهٌ يَوْمَئِذٍ خَاشِعَةٌ. On that day you will see faces that are very humiliated and humbled, referring to the disbelievers. And in this surah we see who are those? قَوْمَ فِرْعَوْنَ وَقَوْمَ ثَمُودَ and وَقَوْمَ عَادٍ. As is mentioned, أَلَمْ تَرَ كَيْفَ فَعَلَ رَبُّكَ بِعَادٍ إِرَمَ ذَاتِ الْعِمَادِ الَّتِي لَمْ يُخْلَقْ مِثْلُهَا فِي الْبِلَادِ وَثَمُودَ الَّذِينَ جَابُوا الصَّخْرَ بِالْوَادِ وَفِرْعَوْنَ ذِي الْأَوْتَادِ. We're going to talk about these nations individually and what their feats and magnificent accomplishments were in this world that they were in, but what was also their downfall. Number three, we see in the previous surah Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَفَلَا يَنْظُرُونَ إِلَى الْإِبِلِ كَيْفَ خُلِقَتْ. So over there's a word that's used is يَنْظُرُونَ. We see that means to see. Have you not seen how the camel is magnificent or great in its creation? And we discussed about the camel itself, because the Bedouin Arab had to deal with a normal day-to-day relationship with the camel. So we talked about the camel and its blessings. But in this surah, what do we see? أَلَمْ تَرَ كَيْفَ فَعَلَ رَبُّكَ بِعَادٍ. Don't you see? So then there's a word called tara, ra'a yara. And so in Arabic, we're going to discuss about what is ru'ya, and opposite of that, or in relation to nadara. So there's two words for seeing. One is ra'a and the other one is nadara. And the last connection from this surah and the previous surah is that both of them discuss about qiyamah. So now as we begin with the first ayat. Bismillah Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. Wal-Fajr, by the dawn. To us, this oath, what we call oath qasam, may not seem very significant because of the fact that we are not used to using it in our language. But historically, language had developed, or language has changed, not necessarily developed, but has changed over time. So the same usages, maybe just even 100 years ago, may not be familiar, may be foreign or alien to us today. But to the people of the past, taking oath was a very serious matter. If I approach an individual and I'm very upset, or there's a serious matter that's about to occur, then I would approach him by posing a qasam, an oath. Like we hear commonly among certain societies, like wallahi, by God. So these types of things, they draw the attention of the listener to a very high level and make them realize that what's coming next, what's coming afterwards is some serious matter, I must pay attention. But at the same time, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes any oath in the Qur'an, He takes it on something very great. As we see, wal asr, al-asr, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala swears by the time. We see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He swears by the night. وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also swears by the morning. وَالصُّبْحِ إِذَا تَنَفَّسَ. Many things Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala swears by. And so when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala swears by anything, that thing holds a great precedence in reality. So the Fajr, we're going to discuss about this Fajr. Many of us understand the word Fajr as a Salatul Fajr. But it has something of a more greater, deeper meaning behind the Arabic usage of Fajr. What Fajr really means to is to penetrate through, to open asunder. And so at night time when we see وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَغْشَى, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in one surah, Surah Layl, what happens at night? It's literally covered, but وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى, when the night literally moves, because it's moving. It's moving. We see that there's a change within the night. There's coloration. There's a change in the color. There's a change in the movement of even the light. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes an oath by this, because what comes after that is what penetrates, and that is the dawn light. So similarly, as the darkness comes and prevails over humanity, let the Qur'an be that guiding light that penetrates through the hearts of the mankind. That's one unique point that the Mufassirun, the scholars of Tafsir, make on this ayah. The other thing is, what is this wal Fajr? What does it hold value of? So that question we can only understand when we understand the concept of oath in the Arabic linguistics. There's qasam and then there's muqsam bihi. There's a thing that you take a qasam on, but then there's an answer and a reply to that qasam. Meaning that if I were to tell you that certain thing is going to happen and you get afraid, but now at that moment you also want an answer that something so great like Qiyamah is going to come. But how do I know it's going to come? What are some signs of it? So here we see in the surah, the 5th ayah, or actually in another surah we see, إِنَّ رَبَّكَ لَبِالْمِرْصَادِ. Surely your Lord is ever on the watch. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this surah, ayah number 14, Allah says, إِنَّ رَبَّكَ لَبِالْمِرْصَادِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching over all of His creation. And so we have to realize one thing before we move on, that this is a Makkan surah. And Makkan surahs usually consist of 3 things. They consist of discussion about Tawheed, about the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Number 2, it talks about the Risalat, the messengership of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the messengers who came before, and the nations as well, as we're going to see in this surah. And lastly, about Akhirah. And so in this surah, one of the main critical things for the audience, one of the main critical things for us when we're reading Surah Fajr, is that our iman in the Akhirah should be increasing. Because we're going to see some very amazing images and descriptions of Yawm al-Qiyamah here in this surah. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala swears by the dawn, al-Fajr. So this means that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is taking an oath on the day, the scholars have a discussion, what is this day, what is this Fajr? So some scholars say that it may refer to the dawn of every single day that brings about a great change in the world. Because does great change happen in the nighttime? It usually happens throughout the day as human beings carry on their days, right? So we'll see the invention of the Apple products occurring during the day. We'll see, great cars being manufactured. All of these things are happening in the daytime. So that's one thing that scholars say. And so what is it supposed to do? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says wal Fajr, it's supposed to draw the audience's attention to the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because can any human being bring the dawn? Can we, with all of our technology, with all of our intellect and faculties, can we bring the dawn? No human being, I guarantee you, ask any human being out there in the world, can they bring the day tomorrow? No one can bring it. This is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is what the reader or the listener is supposed to get inside their mind. So there's some commentators, Ali radiallahu anh, Ibn Abbas and Ibn Zubayr, say that the word is actually general. It refers to any dawn in general, not a specific dawn. And according to another narration of Ibn Abbas radiallahu anh, it refers to the dawn of the Muharram, the first of Muharram, which is the start of the lunar calendar. So we are in that month, right? The month of Muharram. And so Ibn Abbas is saying that momentous occasion of the calendar of Islam, this is something that for us as listeners, we should be very confident, very proud of our legacy of Islam. It's so beautiful that our own calendar, this Gregorian calendar was recently implemented in society. But at the time of Umar radiallahu anh, 1400 years ago, we had the lunar calendar. We were ahead of the world in advancements. And that's no joke. Go to history, my brothers and sisters. Realize where your standing is as Muslims. And then you will realize also that how great this deen is. So Qatada radiallahu anh, he also agrees that this is referring to the month of Muharram or that first day of Muharram. So some commentators like Mujahid, Ikrimah and others, they say that it is the dawn of the day of sacrifice, which is the 10th of Dhul Hijjah. That day that we did the Qurbani, we know that is our Eid. So Ikrimah rahmatullah alayhi, he mentions that it's the 10th of Dhul Hijjah. And so he backs that up with a hadith, a narration from Sayyidina Ibn Abbas radiallahu anh. And the reason for the specification is that according to Islamic principles, Allah has made night to precede the day. So normally in our calendar, when we're looking at how do I understand an Islamic calendar, how do I understand day 1 to day 30? Our days actually start at the nighttime. But what's unique about the 10th of Dhul Hijjah, this day of sacrifice, is that it's actually preceded by an extra night. So there's 2 nights there. So when we're talking about those who go to Hajj, right? So there's the 10 days of Dhul Hijjah. And Yawm Arafah is the ninth night that one has to be in the place of Arafah. So staying at Arafah is actually a fard of Hajj. To have the Hajj accepted, one needs to be in Arafah at that time. So at any time in the day or in the night, you have to be there on the 9th. But if you're there on the morning of the 10th, by the dawn, your Hajj will be also considered valid. So that's one important thing for those who realize that at this moment, the Fajr could be the dawn of the 9th or the 10th, and it would be considered as like 1.5 days in our mind, but in the literature of the hadith is considered as 1 night. So now that we understand a little bit about that, the next ayah says, وَلَيَالٍ عَشْرٍ, and the 10 nights. So like I mentioned, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes oath on very serious things. And this goes back to our history. What are those 10 nights that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is taking an oath on? Ibn Abbas radiallahu anh, Qatada and Mujahid and several others like Dahak and Suddi, they mention that the 10 nights refer to the 10 nights of Dhul Hijjah. So that Dhul Hijjah, the nights that we saw before the sacrifice, the Qurbani or the Yawm al-Eid, those 10 nights are very, very significant. As mentioned in one hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, each night is the reward is given as equivalent to the night of Laylatul Qadr for those 10 nights. So imagine, when we're looking at Laylatul Qadr, right, in Ramadan, everyone is so excited that they were pumped up and we're waiting for that 27th night, which is obviously another topic on its own. But everyone is waiting for that night because they know that night is guaranteed forgiveness. So what happens, even in this hadith is mentioned the power of these 10 nights being equivalent to Laylatul Qadr for each night. So obviously we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is taking an oath on something very, very great. After that we see another commentary by others who mentioned that, like Ibn Abbas, they mentioned that the 10 nights is referring to the 10 nights of Ramadan, the last 10 nights of Ramadan. And we know the power of the last 10 nights, that the person is saved, itqum minan nar, his neck is saved from the hellfire. So that's a very great 10 nights. But some commentators, they say that, what does this have to do with anything, these 10 nights? If you're talking about a possibility of the 10 nights of Dhul Hijjah or the 10 nights of Ramadan. How is that significant? They draw the attention to the revelation of the Qur'an. The revelation of the Qur'an, which happened within the last 10 nights, which we know Laylatul Qadr. Inna anzalnahu fi Laylatul Qadr. Right? The surah that's very common that we recite. The Qur'an was revealed there, but what is more significant? That was the beginning, that alongside with the significance of the Qur'an being revealed, the beginning of the messengership of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam started there. And this Dhul Hijjah number 2, why would, see, if you look at this verse here, وَلَيَالٍ عَشْرٍ, so you see this tanween here. This tanween, it allows for interpretation to be opened up amongst the scholars. Because it's not alif lam, it's something indefinite as opposed to something definite. So that's why there's commentary, more commentary on this verse. So what do we see? We see that also the last, the 10 nights of Dhul Hijjah, those are very great nights because we know the rituals that occur, like going Safa Marwa and pelting the jamarat, Rami jamarat of the shaitan. But one also important thing is, what was one of the last things Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did in his life? It was the Hajj. The Hajj was done. That was one of the last amal. And also we find the last revelation happened at the Hajj. So the beginning of the Risala and now the end of Risala, this one verse, it sums up to us the whole Risala, the whole messengership, and essentially the whole life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the oath is literally on the Mubarak life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now on to the next verse, وَالشَّفْعِ وَالْوَتْرِ, and by the even and the odd. So why take an oath by even and odd? Like what does even and odd have to refer to here? Is it referring to even numbers and odd numbers? Is that what it's referring to? Scholars have discussed, the Mufassirun, they say the Qur'an has not specified what these words even and odd are referring to. Therefore, the commentators have assigned different interpretations to them. For example, one hadith that's narrated by Abu Zubair, by authority of Sayyidina Jabir radiallahu anh, he says, Fajr refers to the dawn, and the 10 nights refer to the first 10 nights of Dhul Hijjah. And al-Watr, which means the odd, refers to the day of Arafah. And because it falls on the 9th. The day of Arafah falls on the 9th. And ash-Shafa refers to the day of sacrifice, which is the 10th of Dhul Hijjah. So obviously the 9th is an odd number, and the 10th would be the even number. So that's just one commentary. Another commentary on this is directly from the Qur'an itself. وَمِن كُلِّ شَيْءٍ خَلَقْنَا زَوْجَيْنِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ. And from everything we have created pairs of two kinds. Subhanallah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, from everything we have created pairs, two, meaning odd, of those two kinds. And so, what are some examples? We have happiness and we have sadness. We have light and we have dark. We have night and we have day. We have cold and we have heat. We have sky and we have earth. We have human and we have jinn. We have male and we have female. The list goes on. We have the sun and the moon. We have belief and disbelief. All of these things are in pairs. It's such harmony. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showing yin and yang before yin and yang. So if that's the even, what would be the odd? It would be none other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. Say, indeed, He is the one. Subhanallah, He is Allah, the one, besought of all. He is in need of no one. He is only the one. So now, after we understand those commentaries, the next verse is saying, وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَسْرٍ. And by the night when it moves away. The word yasr here, so we know the word layl. So sometimes you see a girl, her name is Layla. I'm not asking to go and talk to any girls named Layla, but there is a girl named Layla, potentially. That also is talking about the night. So, وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَسْرٍ. Here, إِذَا means when. Yasr is a verb, meaning that when we're looking at verbs as opposed to nouns, verbs show time. Like, I kicked the ball, I kicked it in the past. I am kicking the ball, I'm kicking it now. Or I will kick the ball, it will be in the future. This yasr being used in the verb is important because it's showing that the night is always going to be moving throughout time. Until when we're going to see dakkan dakka, when the whole world will be shattered into pieces. But at the moment right now, the night is moving by the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the word yasr is derived from sara, and it means to walk in the night or travel by night. The verse says that when the night itself moves away, it signifies the night departs and goes away. So after taking oath on 4 things, on 5 things, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in this next verse, هَلْ فِي ذَلِكَ قَسَمٌ لِذِي حِجْرٍ. Hal is for question. It's for people who are in doubt. When people, after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has shown sign after sign after sign, and yet these people, ingrates, are still in doubt that who is this creator? Still, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving them chance. He says, هَلْ فِي ذَلِكَ قَسَمٌ لِذِي حِجْرٍ. Is there in this oath of sufficient proof for whoever has a mind that God is able to punish ungodly? Another translation says, is there in this oath of sufficient proof for whoever has a mind that God is able to punish the ungodly? So in this, Mufti Shafi Usmani, he says, is there in that an oath for a man of sense? Is there in that an oath enough for a man of sense? Meaning that if you look here, if you see qasam, we know that qasam means oath. So the question would be, why is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reiterating qasam? Is there a qasam within the qasam that is going to hit these people of intellect, so-called intellect? So how do we resolve this situation? The situation is resolved when we say, is there not in that oath enough? So there is something hidden or mahzuf, what we call in Arabic, baqa. Is there nothing left, baqi, left for a man of sense? So an intelligent person is in a very special style invited to think and reflect in this verse. He's asked to look and ponder. The word hijr, if we look at the word hijr here, هَلْ فِي ذَلِكَ قَسَمٌ لِذِي حِجْرٍ. The word hijr literally denotes to prevent. So what does it do? The intellect literally prevents a person from qabih things. Al-aql mani' min al-qaba'ih. That's what scholars are mentioning about the aql. The intellect, what it's normally supposed to do for you and I, is supposed to prevent us from things that are very bad or harmful or detrimental to us. And we'll see some examples of that. So the intellect has been called hijr here because it prevents a person from doing that which is unbecoming of him. And so actions or statements that aren't good for us. Like let's say I'm in a heated argument with somebody and I may say something to him that we know from a hadith that a person could be at the heights of ibadah, or he could be at the highest level of relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but he says one thing, maybe disrespect to his mother, maybe disrespect to his father, and that could lower all his good deeds into null. That's how significant this aql is. We need to use our aql, but we also need to turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for guidance. But here, are these oaths not sufficient for a man possessed of intellect, sound reasoning, understanding, and religious discernment? The sentence is in the form of interrogation to awaken man from his slumber. The subject of oath is implied, though not explicitly stated. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala poses this question, هَلْ فِي ذَلِكَ قَسَمٌ لِذِي حِجْرٍ? Because the mushrikun, the polytheists of Arabia, those who are fighting and arguing against Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Qur'an, they are literally in a slumber. They haven't woken up after sign after sign after sign. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving them recollection of this. But more importantly, as we see in the next verse, أَلَمْ تَرَ كَيْفَ فَعَلَ رَبُّكَ بِعَادٍ. And we discussed about this at the beginning of our talk today. Have you not seen, O Prophet, how your Lord dealt with the people? Who are those people? The next verse, as well as this one, it mentions the people of Ad, Iram of the pillars, and التي لم يخلق مثلها في البلاد, discussing about what was the stature and the strength of these people. But going back, we see alam tara. What is this alam tara? We discussed about, there's another word afala yanzuruna in the previous surah. So here, what the scholars are saying that nadara yanzuru literally means to look with your own eyes. But tara, alam tara, ra'a yara ru'yatan means to look within your heart, to reflect. It means it's not the physical seeing, but it's the internal seeing. Have you not seen or reflected on the state of those who came before you, the people of Ad? So the question is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala giving me a history lesson? Why? I mean, I study enough history in class. Why do I need to be studying some more? The reality is that if we do not look at the situation of those who came before, we will not learn a lesson to see what happened to the reason for their destruction. Because go and travel throughout the world. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ سِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ فَانْظُرُوا كَيْفَ كَانَ عَاقِبَةُ الْمُكَذِّبِينَ كَيْفَ كَانَ عَاقِبَةُ الْمُجْرِمِينَ. Go and travel in the world and see what was the end result of those people who were criminals against themselves, against the laws and orders and dictates of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Qawm Thamud, they killed a camel that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created miraculously, brought it out from the mountain. Ad, they were given power and strength such that Mufassirun, some are saying that they were 18 feet tall. 18 feet tall, imagine 18 feet tall. They were building structures within the mountains. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them these great blessings and ni'mah. But how do we parallel that to our situation, my brothers and sisters? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us tools to create a massive 200-ton unit that flies in the air. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us such great blessings of technology, talking to somebody miles and hundreds of miles away while you're still in one position. But do not let this hold you down in remembering who is the one who gave you the intellect in the first place. That's why in the previous verse, intellect is being referred to. That you think you have intellect, others also thought they had intellect. But what happened to them who were greater? What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say about Ad? That they were the nation of pillars. They were literally like pillars. Like you see these pillars on the sides here, they were holding down, essentially homes themselves. They were gigantic creatures. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, they thought they weren't gonna get destroyed, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also destroyed them. So have you not seen how your Lord dealt with Ad of Iram, the men of tall pillars? So the word Iram is grammatically speaking, it's talking about badal, meaning a complement. For those who are studying the Arabic grammar, it can be atf bayan or badal. But the purpose of the construction, what is the purpose of that construction? Is to specify one of the two tribes of Ad. There was two tribes of Ad. As you see in this verse here, Alam tara kayfa fa'ala rabbuka bi'ad, that Ad, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Qur'an about Ad al-Ula, that they were the early generation of Ad. And then there was Ad al-Ukhra, the second generation. So what is their connection? The first generation, they came before Iram. So Iram is mentioned here in this second. Iram is the grandson of Ad. So there's Ad al-Ula, who is the grandfather, and Iram who is the grandson. And so that's how their linkage is there. So in Surah Najm, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Adan al-Ula. And so here they're given an epithet, that Zatul Imad, they were men of tall pillars. So maybe you heard the name Imad before. Imad, literally, and Umud, which is the plural, they mean that the people of Ad are mentioned as the men of tall pillars because they were very tall in stature. And they were stronger and more powerful people than any other of the nations that came before or even after. So the Qur'an describes them explicitly how? لَمْ يُخْلَقْ مِثْلُهَا فِي الْبِلَادِ, the like of whom were never created in the lands. So the Qur'an made it very clear that this nation was the tallest as well as the strongest in their physical stature. So don't be surprised, O Muslims, about your stature and your strength, or the qawm, the nation of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, all those to follow later. So after this, what do we see? وَثَمُودَ الَّذِينَ جَابُوا الصَّخْرَ بِالْوَادِ. So here we see Thamud. And we discussed a little bit about Thamud. Thamud was a people of Salih alayhi salam. So Salih was the prophet, and to Ad, the prophet that was sent was Hud. So to Ad was Hud, and to Thamud was Salih. And so what did they do? They broke a lot of the agreements and covenants with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What happened? One man, he killed the camel that was born from the mountain, and it gave birth to a baby camel. They killed them because he was fighting for a girl. The girl said, if you really love me, there's two men that were fighting over the girl, as we will learn in Surah Shams, وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا. These two boys, she said that whoever wants me will go and slaughter this camel. And so one of them did, but it caused the wrath and the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to descend on these people. And they were people that they carved their homes into the great rocks, into the mountains, as you see in Petra and these different areas of Arabia. The next verse, وَفِرْعَوْنَ ذِي الْأَوْتَادِ. Fir'aun, the Pharaoh, he was the man of the stakes, meaning that there's multiple meanings of the stakes here, the pegs. So here it says, and Pharaoh of the lofty structures. It's actually referring to the pegs. So Autad is the plural of Watad. Watad means pegs. So Fir'aun is referred to as the man of the stakes because the majority of the commentators, they hold the view that he was the one to torture, very cruelly, torture and inflict punishment onto the people. And when he was angry with people, he would hammer stakes into the ground and then tie them to those stakes. And then he would leave them to be eaten by the snakes and the scorpions. Other commentators have said that he had a wife named Asiya, as we have known in some of the other surah, is a referral to the wife of Fir'aun. She became a Muslimah. She entered into the fold of Islam. She took the da'wah of Musa alayhi salam. But what did Fir'aun do? He bolted her body and pegged her hands and her legs and then killed her through that means. So the next verse says, الَّذِينَ طَغَوْا فِي الْبِلَادِ. They transgressed in the lands. So all of these nations, they transgressed the orders, they went against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the messenger of the time. And so what is it for us? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam give us a message, we do not want to do tughyan. We do not want to be disobedient when the message comes to us. Rather, we want to fulfill those orders to the best of our abilities. Or else, what will happen? We see here, فَأَكْثَرُوا فِيهَا الْفَسَادِ. They spread there much corruption. But فَصَبَّ عَلَيْهِمْ رَبُّكَ صَوْتَ عَذَابٍ. So your Lord poured upon them a scourge of torment. So فَصَبَّ, the word sabba, literally talking about like a bucket full of water. But when you throw a bucket, it comes all at once. It's a huge wave that spreads on them. And sawt here is literally a whip. So it's interesting here that you're seeing the imagery of the adhab being like a whip. Because when you inflict a punishment because of some mischief, in the past what they would do is whip. And that signifies some kind of humility and disgrace that occurs because it hits the person's body. And this is a similar situation that the previous nations occurred, that they received. So we see Fir'aun, that he was drowned in the sea. The Ad, what did they have? They had a punishment. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took them and took the wind and wiped them clear for 7 days and 7 nights, up and down. And for the Samud, a screeching scream came and literally blew the insides of their brains because of the screeching sound of it. Inna rabbaka labil mirsad. So we discussed about this at the beginning, that surely your Lord is ever on the watch. Because look, when anyone thinks that, what happened with the Titanic? The Titanic, they said, no, not even God can bring us down. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all listener. Allah is Sami'. Allah is Basir. We should realize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hears everybody and every situation. And so if we think that we are greater than Allah, which these nations had thought about themselves, and we are going to see in the next few verses that the Quraysh, the people of Makkah, they also thought that they could be better than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ended grabbing them and seizing them. So what is rasada? Here we see inna rabbaka labil mirsad. Mirsad comes from the root of rasada, which means to lie in wait or in watch. Because it's like an ambush where you're at a place of observation. So you're going and you're attacking a group that's about to come and fight you. So these people are literally at war with Allah, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ambushes them instead. So the purpose of this verse is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always watching and observing their movements and activities. You think that Allah doesn't know what's going on in certain leadership buildings of the world? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows everything. His plan is greater than our plans, and even their plans, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's plan is even greater than their plan. So no one should think that he could escape the divine punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Some commentators state that this verse is the subject of the 5 oaths that we mentioned before, وَالْفَجْرِ وَلَيَالٍ عَشْرٍ وَالشَّفْعِ وَالْوَتْرِ وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَسْرٍ. So now on to the second topic of this surah, as we're going to close in a few minutes inshallah, because we'll continue with Surah Fajr, because it's a very, very deep surah, and it has a lot of beautiful lessons. I really wish that we can, be delving into each and every single ayah, but we have to move a little bit faster. In this ayah we see فَأَمَّا الْإِنسَانُ إِذَا مَبْتَلَاهُ رَبُّهُ فَأَكْرَمَهُ وَنَعَمَهُ فَيَقُولُ رَبِّي أَكْرَمَنِ. What is this ayah saying? Now as for man, whenever his Lord tries him, ibtila, bala, لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. We see in Surah Mulk, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests human beings for a reason. Many people saying, why am I tested? Why is there so much difficulty in my life? I'm just a normal person. I just want to live a normal life. I don't want to have these difficulties. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has greater wisdom than you and I. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is testing us, لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا, to see who is the best in deeds. This life here is not about this constant struggle, as we're going to see, about gathering wealth. مَالًا حُبًّا جَمًّا, that they have such an intense love for wealth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about humans' nature in this surah, we're going to see. But this life is not, we were not sent here for a play. لَعِبًا وَلَهْوًا وَزِينًا. The beautification of the world is there, but is there for a test, my brothers and sisters. And so, when we go, and what happens to a true believer? When he watches a game, when his time wastes in other things other than ibadah, he feels a lot of regret. And that goes to the concept of nafsul lawwama that we're going to discuss in this surah. There's 3 types of nafs. I'll just introduce them now because we're on the topic. Nafs, there's 3 types of nafs as mentioned in the Qur'an. Nafsul ammara, nafsul lawwama, and nafsul mutma'inna, as we're going to see in this surah. Such a beautiful word, nafsul mutma'inna, itminan. But nafsul ammara first and foremost. Nafsul ammara is that nafs, that internal feeling inside an individual. The nafs, the spirit, if you want to translate it as that, is that base, that lowliest nafs, that is worse than even animals. It's a state that a person, he's not even rebuking himself if he does any wrong. So that's the lowest stage a human being can get to. So it's like a mechanism. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like for example, when a person, he takes his first smoke, he coughs. His body is telling him that this is not something natural for my system. So therefore I think I shouldn't do it. Though even in the mind, we've already seen on the back of a cigarette box that is saying how much cancer is gonna cause and all that stuff. But still, the body is even giving a mechanism off. And also when you see a child, when he lies and he's rebuked by his mother or father, then his internal feeling is that he should cry. But if he continues to lie over his life, it becomes something natural. That whole feeling of lying being something bad is broken. So similarly, that nafsul ammara is the lowest animal self. He's not even looking at female with dignity. He's not looking at wealth to give in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as we're going to see, to give to the miskin, to honor them, to give to those who are orphans, to give to those who are poor. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about in this surah specifically, and in the plethora, in the great hadith that we see of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how much command, how much order, how much encouragement is saying to give the wealth. What a beautiful deen. But how much we're talking about other things. What is the masla on this? What is the hukum? What is the ruling on this issue? What is the ruling on that issue? How about giving to the poor? Have we not read the Qur'an? Have we not looked at the orphans and the yatim? Look at the non-Muslims. They're going much farther than us in giving to other causes, even though their intention may be wrong. But the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that those who give to others, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala definitely give them. That's why you see them, they keep giving and giving and giving. Allah keeps increasing their wealth. But we as Muslims haven't taken heed. We have not taken lesson from the words of the Qur'an. But the last nafs, so the second nafs is nafsul lawwama, the rebuking self. that when a person, he does something wrong, he engages in something that feels wrong, there's a sense that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the natural, the nature, the fitrah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put in the human beings, that if there's something wrong, that he's going to feel it, unless that person breaks it and he goes to the nafs al-ammara. And the last one is, as mentioned in this surah, nafsul mutma'inna. The nafsul mutma'inna is the state of a human being at complete contentment. Itminan means contentment. And so the question is, how can the spirit be content? So the scholars have a debate or a discussion on this, and it's quite lengthy, but very importantly, as a summary, we should understand that famous Sahaba has said that the itminan is referring to when a person, when he's going to his grave, when he's about to pass away, that at that time, he will know that if he's in itminan, in sukoon or not, because the angel of death is coming to grab the soul of that individual. So if he's turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because at that time there's a promise from the angel coming that, oh, you who have worshipped Allah, oh, you good slave, you believer in Allah, you will have a very great abode now, you will have a great Jannah and paradise waiting for you. And so that is itminan, as opposed to the disbeliever. He's going to have a terrible ending where the angel of death comes, and while he's extracting the ruh, the soul, then it's coming out as a clot, a piece of thorn in a ball, and it's being scraped out of that ball and being literally being pulled out of it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from that. So roughly we are at the halfway point of the surah, and the main context from here on forth is talking about the qiyamah, the scenes of the Day of Judgment, the akhirat, the realities of the akhirah. So I hope that everyone stay in tune for the following week, as the next week, as we carry on our tafsir session inshallah. Wa akhiru da'wana anil hamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Jazakullahu Khairun.